The snow fell hard that night in the outer regions of New Colorado Settlement. Officer Daniel Murphy had been driving his patrol vehicle through the frozen forest for almost 3 hours now. His shift was supposed to end at midnight, but something on his scanner caught his attention. There was a heat signature coming from near the old abandoned research building that nobody used anymore. Daniel knew these woods better than most people in the settlement. He had been patrolling this area for 3 years, and he knew when something was not right. The temperature outside was dropping fast, and it was already 20 degrees below zero. Nothing should be out here in this kind of weather. Daniel pushed his vehicle forward through the deep snow and moved between the tall pine trees. His headlights cut through the darkness, and the falling snow made it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. The scanner beeped again and showed him the heat signature was getting closer. He slowed down and grabbed his flashlight from the seat next to him. Whatever was out here needed help, or it would not survive the night. When Daniel got closer to the source of the heat signature, he stopped his vehicle and stepped out into the freezing cold. The wind hit his face like a hammer, and he pulled his coat tighter around his body. He walked slowly toward a large fallen tree that was covered in snow. His flashlight beam moved across the ground until it landed on something that made his heart beat faster. There, lying in a small hole under the fallen tree, was a German Shepherd. The dog was big and covered in dirt and snow, but what caught Daniel's attention was that the dog was clearly pregnant and looked like she could give birth at any moment. The shepherd lifted her head when the light hit her eyes. She did not growl or try to run away. Instead, she just looked at him with dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to understand everything. Daniel had seen a lot of stray animals during his time as an officer, but there was something different about this one. Something in the way she watched him made him feel like she was studying him, just as much as he was studying her. Daniel moved closer very slowly and kept talking to the dog in a soft voice. He told her that he was there to help and that everything would be okay. The shepherd watched him come closer but did not move. When he got within a few feet of her, he could see that she was shivering badly. Her fur was wet and matted, and she looked like she had not eaten in days. Daniel noticed something else too. Around her neck was a collar, but it was not a normal collar. It looked military and had some kind of device attached to it that he did not recognize. The device had a small screen on it, but the screen was dark and looked like it had been turned off for a long time. Daniel reached out his hand slowly, and the dog let him touch her head. Her fur was cold and wet under his gloved hand. He could feel her shaking from the cold and from exhaustion. Without thinking twice, Daniel took off his thermal coat and wrapped it around the dog. She was too weak to resist and seemed grateful for the warmth. Daniel activated his emergency communicator and called back to the settlement. He told them he had found an injured pregnant dog and needed to bring her in right away. The dispatcher on the other end told him to bring the animal to the veterinary center at the settlement. Daniel carefully lifted the German Shepherd in his arms. She was heavy, but he managed to carry her back to his vehicle. He placed her gently in the back seat and covered her with another blanket he kept for emergencies. The dog looked at him with those same intelligent eyes, and Daniel felt something strange in his chest. It was like she was trying to tell him something. He shook his head and told himself he was being silly. She was just a scared pregnant dog who needed help. But deep down, Daniel knew there was more to this animal than met the eye. The drive back to the settlement took 30 minutes, and Daniel kept checking on the dog through his rearview mirror. She lay still in the back seat with her eyes half closed. A few times she would lift her head and look at him like she was making sure he was still there. Daniel talked to her the whole way back. He told her about the settlement and the veterinary center, and how the doctor there was really good with animals. He was not sure why he was talking so much to a dog, but it felt like the right thing to do. When they finally reached the settlement, the streets were empty. It was almost 2 in the morning, and most people were asleep. Daniel drove straight to the veterinary center, which was a small building on the east side of the settlement. The lights were on inside, and he could see Dr. Lisa Montgomery waiting at the door. Lisa was the best veterinarian in the settlement and had been working there for 5 years. She was young and smart and cared deeply about every animal she treated. Daniel carried the German Shepherd inside and placed her on the examination table. Lisa immediately began checking the dog over with her medical scanner. The scanner hummed softly as it moved over the dog's body. Daniel watched as Lisa's face went from concerned to confused to completely shocked in the span of about 30 seconds. She looked at Daniel and then back at the dog. She ran the scanner over the dog again like she could not believe what she was seeing. Daniel asked her what was wrong, and Lisa just shook her head. She told him to come look at the screen. Daniel moved closer and looked at the holographic display that showed the inside of the dog's body. At first, he did not understand what he was seeing. There were the puppies in the dog's belly, which he expected. But there was something else. Running along the dog's spine were small metal objects that glowed blue on the scanner. Lisa pointed at them and told Daniel those were neural implants. Advanced military-grade neural implants that had been banned over 15 years ago. Daniel felt his mouth go dry. He looked at the German shepherd who was watching both of them with those impossibly aware eyes, and he realized this was no ordinary dog. Lisa stood frozen, looking at her scanner display for what felt like forever. Daniel could see her hands shaking slightly as she zoomed in on different parts of the scan. The German shepherd lay quietly on the examination table, breathing slowly but watching everything they did with sharp attention. Lisa finally turned to Daniel and spoke in a whisper, even though there was nobody else in the clinic. She told him this was not just any dog with implants. This was a sentinel dog from the old Enhanced Animal program. Daniel had heard stories about that program when he was younger, but he thought they were just rumors or legends. Lisa explained that the program had been real, and it was created by the military almost 20 years ago. The goal was to make animals smarter so they could help humans in space exploration and military missions. Scientists had developed special implants that connected directly to the animal's brain and boosted their intelligence to levels nobody thought possible. The program had created dogs that could understand complex commands and even solve problems like humans could. But something had gone wrong with the program. Lisa pulled up some old files on her computer that she had access to through her medical database. She showed Daniel articles and reports from 15 years ago. The Enhanced Animal program had been shut down suddenly, and all the animals in the program were supposed to have been put down. The official reason given was that the program was too expensive and the results were not what the military wanted. But Lisa said there were rumors that the real reason was much darker. Some people believed the animals had become too intelligent and had started showing signs of real consciousness and emotions. The military had gotten scared of what they created and decided to end the program completely. Every single sentinel dog was supposed to have been euthanized at a research station called Europa Station. Daniel looked at the German shepherd on the table. If all the sentinel dogs were supposed to be dead, then how was this one here alive and pregnant in the middle of nowhere? Lisa ran more scans, and what she found next made both of them go silent. The puppies inside the dog were not normal puppies. The scanner showed that they had preliminary neural structures that matched the mother's implants. Lisa explained that this should not be possible. The scientists who created the Enhanced Animal program had sworn that the implants could not be passed down to offspring. The implants were supposed to be technology added to the animal after birth, not something that could be inherited. But the scanner did not lie. These puppies were already showing signs of enhanced neural development even before they were born. Whatever had been done to this German shepherd had changed her at a genetic level. Her puppies would be born with the same enhanced intelligence she had. Daniel asked Lisa what this meant, and she told him it meant someone had lied about the program. The scientists had achieved something far beyond what they admitted. They had not just made smart animals. They had created a new species. Daniel walked over to the examination table and looked down at the German shepherd. He reached out and gently petted her head. She leaned into his touch slightly and made a soft sound. Her eyes met his, and Daniel felt that strange feeling again. It was like looking into the eyes of another person, not an animal. He asked Lisa if the dog could understand them. Lisa said she did not know for sure, but based on the implants and the neural activity she was seeing, the dog probably understood every word they were saying. That thought made Daniel feel uncomfortable and amazed at the same time. He had been talking to this dog like she was just an animal. But what if she really did understand everything? What if she had thoughts and feelings just like humans did? The idea was both wonderful and terrifying. Lisa said they needed to report this to someone in authority. This was bigger than just a stray dog. This was evidence of a secret military program that had lied about destroying conscious beings. Daniel agreed, but said they needed to be careful. If someone had gone through the trouble of claiming all the sentinel dogs were dead, then they probably would not be happy to find out one was still alive. They needed to protect this dog while they figured out what to do. Lisa nodded and said she would keep the dog here at the clinic and run more tests. She would also make sure the dog got the nutrition and care she needed. The puppies could come any day now, and they wanted to make sure both the mother and babies were healthy. Daniel said he would stay at the clinic for the rest of the night. He did not want to leave the dog alone, and he had a feeling she felt safer with him around. As the night went on, Lisa worked on making a comfortable bed for the German Shepherd in one of the recovery rooms. She set up heating lamps and got food and water ready. The dog ate slowly but ate everything Lisa gave her. It was clear she had been starving for a while. Daniel sat in a chair next to the recovery room and watched through the window. He still could not believe what he had stumbled onto. Just a few hours ago, he was doing a normal patrol, and now he was guarding what might be the last surviving member of a secret military program. He thought about the collar around the dog's neck with the dead tracking device. Someone had been tracking this dog at some point. Maybe whoever owned her had been looking for her. Or maybe she had escaped from someone who wanted to hurt her. Around 4 in the morning, something happened that changed everything. Daniel had dozed off in his chair when he heard a soft scratching sound. He opened his eyes and saw the German Shepherd standing at the window of her recovery room looking at him. She was scratching at the glass with her paw. Daniel stood up and walked over to the window. The dog looked at him intently and then turned and walked to the corner of the room where Lisa had left her medical datapad. The dog nosed the datapad toward the door and then looked back at Daniel. She did this 3 times until Daniel understood she wanted him to come in and bring the datapad to her. His heart racing, Daniel opened the door to the recovery room. The dog sat down and waited patiently. Daniel picked up the datapad and held it. The dog stood up and walked over to him. She sat down right in front of him and stared at the datapad. Then she lifted her paw and touched the screen. Daniel nearly dropped the device in shock. The datapad had a communication program that Lisa sometimes used with injured animals. It showed simple pictures and symbols that could be used to understand what an animal might need. But this dog was not just randomly touching the screen. She was deliberately selecting symbols one after another. Daniel watched as the symbols appeared. The first symbol was a picture of danger. The second was a picture of other dogs. The third was a picture of people coming. The fourth was a picture of baby animals. The dog stopped and looked up at Daniel. He stared at the screen, trying to understand. The dog touched the screen again. This time she selected symbols that showed hiding and a building and more dogs like her. Then she selected a symbol that showed being trapped. Daniel felt his blood turn cold. This dog was telling him something. She was warning him. There were other sentinel dogs somewhere hidden, and someone was coming to find them. Someone was coming to hurt them. Daniel immediately called Captain Helen Brooks, even though it was 4:30 in the morning. Helen was the security chief for the entire settlement, and if anyone would know what to do, it would be her. Helen answered after 3 rings, sounding alert despite the early hour. Daniel quickly explained what had happened with the German Shepherd and the communication through the datapad. There was silence on the other end of the line for a few seconds. Then Helen told him to stay right where he was and not let anyone near that dog. She said she would be there in 10 minutes. Daniel hung up and looked at the shepherd, who had gone back to her bed and was lying down again. She looked tired, but her eyes were still watching him carefully. Daniel knelt down next to her and spoke softly. He told her that help was coming and that they would figure this out together. The dog's tail moved slightly, like she understood him. Helen arrived exactly 10 minutes later, dressed in her uniform and carrying a secure tablet computer. She was a woman in her early 40s with short gray hair and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. She had been in the military before coming to the settlement, and Daniel trusted her completely. Helen went straight to the recovery room and looked at the German Shepherd for a long moment. Then she turned to Daniel and Lisa and asked them to tell her everything from the beginning. They spent the next hour going over every detail. Helen listened without interrupting and took notes on her tablet. When they finished, she told them what she knew about the enhanced animal program. She had higher security clearance than most people and had access to classified files that regular citizens never saw. Helen explained that the enhanced animal program had been one of the most secret military projects of the last 20 years. The goal had been exactly what Lisa said: to create super-intelligent animals that could work alongside humans in dangerous environments. The program had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. The sentinel dogs they created were not just smart, they were conscious. They could think and feel and communicate in ways that blurred the line between animal and person, but that success had terrified the people in charge. Helen pulled up old classified files on her tablet and showed them to Daniel and Lisa. The files contained reports from scientists who worked on the program. These scientists had written about how the dogs showed signs of emotional complexity. The dogs formed deep bonds with each other and with their handlers. They showed grief when separated from loved ones. They showed joy and curiosity, and even what looked like humor. Some of the dogs had figured out how to communicate using simple symbols and pictures, much like what Daniel had just witnessed. The scientists had argued that these animals deserved rights and protection as conscious beings, but the military leaders did not want to hear it. Helen showed them the final report that shut down the program. It claimed that the Sentinel dogs were unstable and potentially dangerous. It said that the implants caused unpredictable behavior, and that the animals could not be controlled reliably. The report recommended immediate termination of all subjects. Within 1 week, Europa Station, where the program was based, had sent out a message saying all the Sentinel dogs had been euthanized humanely. The program was officially closed and all research was classified. But Helen had found something interesting in the files. There was a scientist named Dr. Raymond Cole, who had been the lead researcher on the program. He had fought against the termination order and had sent multiple complaints to his superiors. Then one day he disappeared. His last known location was Europa Station, right before it was decommissioned. The official story was that he retired and moved off-world, but there was no record of him anywhere after that day. Helen believed that Dr. Cole had helped the Sentinel dogs escape. She thought he could not stand to see his life's work destroyed, especially when he knew the dogs were conscious beings who did not deserve to die. The German Shepherd on the bed was proof that at least some of the dogs had survived. Helen ran a check on the dog's implant signature using her security access. It took a few minutes, but she found a match. The dog's designation had been Sentinel-7, and her call sign had been Guardian. She had been one of 12 dogs in the final test group at Europa Station. According to the official records, Guardian had been terminated 15 years ago, along with all the others. But here she was, alive and pregnant and trying to warn them about danger. Helen said they needed to find out where the other Sentinel dogs were hiding before someone else found them. Daniel asked who would be looking for the dogs after 15 years. Helen's face grew dark and she pulled up another file. She showed them a name, General Patrick Sutton. Sutton had been the commanding officer who gave the order to terminate all the Sentinel dogs. He was retired now but still had connections in the military and government. Helen had received an alert just an hour ago that made her blood run cold. An unmarked ship had entered their star system and was requesting permission to land at the settlement. The ship's transponder code traced back to a private corporation, but Helen had dug deeper. The corporation was owned by a shell company that was linked to General Sutton. The ship was claiming they were there to retrieve escaped research property. They did not say what kind of property, but the timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. Somehow Sutton had found out that one of the Sentinel dogs was still alive, and he was coming to finish what he started 15 years ago. Lisa asked why Sutton would care after all this time. Helen explained that if it came out that the military had ordered the death of conscious beings, it would be a massive scandal. It could be considered a war crime under current laws. Sutton had built his career on following orders and maintaining security. If evidence of the Sentinel dog's survival became public, he could face serious charges. He needed to make sure all evidence was destroyed permanently. That meant killing Guardian and any other Sentinel dogs that were still alive. It also meant silencing anyone who knew the truth. Daniel felt anger rising in his chest. This dog had survived 15 years on the run. She had found a way to stay alive and even have puppies. She had traveled through a frozen forest while pregnant to find help. And now someone wanted to kill her just to protect a secret. Helen made a decision right there. She told Daniel and Lisa that they were going to protect Guardian and find the other Sentinel dogs. She would deny the landing request for the unmarked ship and buy them some time. She would also contact some friends she had in the colonial government who might be able to help, but they needed to move fast. If Guardian knew where the other dogs were hiding, they needed to get to them before Sutton did. Lisa said Guardian was strong enough to travel, but she was still very pregnant and could go into labor at any time. They would need to be careful and have medical supplies ready. Daniel said he would go with Guardian to find the others. He felt a responsibility to this dog now. He had found her and she had trusted him enough to communicate with him. He was not going to let her down. Helen agreed and started making preparations. She would assign a small team to go with Daniel. They would take a secure vehicle with supplies and weapons just in case. They would also take medical equipment so Lisa could help if Guardian went into labor during the journey. As the sun started to rise over the settlement, Daniel sat with Guardian in her recovery room. He showed her a map on the datapad and asked her if she could show him where the other dogs were. Guardian stood up and walked over to the datapad. She studied the map carefully for several minutes. Then she began touching the screen, zooming in on a specific area. It was a mountain range about 200 miles north of the settlement. The area was called Frost Ridge, and it was some of the most dangerous terrain on the planet. Few people ever went there because of the extreme cold and treacherous conditions. Guardian kept zooming in until she highlighted a specific valley deep in the mountains. She looked at Daniel and touched one more symbol on the screen. The symbol was a house. That was where the other sentinel dogs were hiding. That was where Dr. Cole had taken them 15 years ago to keep them safe. 2 days passed before Guardian was ready to travel. During that time, Lisa had made sure the dog got plenty of food and rest. Guardian had gained back some weight and her eyes looked more alert. But the most amazing thing happened on the second night. Guardian went into labor. Lisa and Daniel stayed with her through the whole process. It took 6 hours, but Guardian gave birth to 5 healthy puppies. They were beautiful with the same dark fur as their mother. Lisa examined each puppy carefully with her scanner. What she found confirmed their suspicions. All 5 puppies showed the same enhanced neural structures as Guardian. They were born with the capability for increased intelligence. It would take time for the implants to fully develop, but these puppies would grow up to be just as smart as their mother. Guardian was an excellent mother despite everything she had been through. She cleaned each puppy and made sure they were nursing properly. Daniel watched with amazement as she counted each puppy with her nose like she was making sure all 5 were there and safe. But even while caring for her newborns, Guardian kept looking at Daniel with urgent eyes. She would go to the datapad when the puppies were sleeping and touch the symbols for danger and hurry. She was telling them they did not have much time. Helen came by every day with updates, and none of them were good. The unmarked ship was still in orbit around the planet. Helen had denied their landing request, but they were not leaving. They were just waiting. Helen's contacts in the colonial government were moving slowly. It took time to build a case and get the right people involved. Meanwhile, General Sutton's people were getting impatient. Helen had intercepted communications showing they were considering landing without permission. If they did that, it could start a serious conflict. On the 3rd day, Lisa declared that Guardian was strong enough to travel. The puppies were nursing well and were healthy. Lisa prepared a special carrier that would keep the puppies warm and safe during the journey. Guardian would need to stay close to her babies, but she could travel if they were careful. Helen had assembled a small team for the mission. Besides Daniel, there was Kyle Burton, who was the best wilderness tracker in the settlement. Kyle was in his 30s and had spent most of his life exploring the wild areas of the planet. If anyone could get them through Frost Ridge safely, it was him. Helen wanted to come herself, but she needed to stay at the settlement to deal with Sutton's ship. She gave Daniel a secure communicator and told him to check in every 6 hours. If they missed a check-in, she would send help immediately. The team loaded up a large all-terrain vehicle with everything they would need. They packed food and water for a week, even though they hoped to be back sooner. They brought medical supplies and equipment to keep Guardian and her puppies comfortable. They also brought weapons just in case. Helen did not think Sutton's people knew where the other sentinel dogs were hiding, but she was not taking chances. If they ran into trouble, Daniel and Kyle needed to be able to defend themselves. Guardian watched all the preparations with intelligent eyes. When it was time to go, she picked up each of her puppies gently in her mouth and placed them in the carrier Lisa had made. Then she looked at Daniel and walked to the vehicle. She was ready. The journey to Frost Ridge took 3 days. The first day was easy, driving through relatively flat terrain with scattered trees. Guardian rode in the back of the vehicle with her puppies. She nursed them regularly and kept them clean. Daniel noticed she barely slept. She was always alert, always watching. On the second day, they entered the foothills of the mountain range and the terrain got much harder. Kyle had to navigate carefully around rocks and through narrow passes. The temperature dropped steadily as they climbed higher. By the evening of the second day, it was snowing heavily. They set up camp for the night in a sheltered spot between 2 large boulders. Daniel made sure Guardian and her puppies were warm and fed. Guardian ate quickly and then went back to her babies. But several times during the night, Daniel caught her standing at the entrance to the tent, looking out into the darkness like she was watching for something. On the third day, they entered Frost Ridge proper. The mountains here were massive and covered in ice and snow. The wind howled constantly and visibility was poor. Kyle drove slowly, following Guardian's directions. She had proven to be an excellent navigator. Whenever they came to a fork in the path or a difficult section, Guardian would move to the front of the vehicle and indicate which way to go. It was clear she had traveled this route before, probably many times. She knew exactly where she was going. Around midday, they reached a particularly steep section. The vehicle struggled to climb, and Kyle was worried they might get stuck. But Guardian became very insistent, touching the data pad over and over, showing symbols for keep going. And almost there. Kyle trusted her instinct and pushed the vehicle harder. They made it over the ridge and suddenly found themselves looking down into a hidden valley. The valley was beautiful in a harsh way. It was surrounded on all sides by steep cliffs that protected it from the worst of the wind. There was a frozen lake at the bottom and what looked like a geothermal vent that kept part of the lake from freezing completely. Steam rose from the water, creating an eerie mist. But what caught their attention was the structure built into the side of the cliff. It was camouflaged perfectly to blend with the rock face. If Guardian had not led them right to it, they never would have spotted it. Kyle drove the vehicle down into the valley carefully. As they got closer to the structure, Daniel could see it was more extensive than he first thought. This was not just a simple shelter. This was a full facility built into the mountain itself. Someone had spent a lot of time and resources creating this place. They parked the vehicle near the entrance and Daniel climbed out. The cold hit him immediately and he pulled his coat tight. Guardian jumped out after him, carrying one of her puppies in her mouth. She set the puppy down in the carrier and then stood at attention, looking at the entrance to the facility. Kyle got the other puppies settled and then joined Daniel. They approached the entrance slowly. It was a large metal door built into the rock. The door was closed, but there was a small control panel next to it. The panel was still lit, which meant the facility had power. Guardian walked right up to the door and scratched at it. Then she sat down and waited. Daniel was about to try the control panel when the door suddenly began to open. It moved smoothly and quietly, revealing a dark corridor beyond. Warm air rushed out of the opening. Someone or something inside had opened the door. Guardian immediately picked up one of her puppies and walked through the entrance. She did not hesitate at all. Daniel and Kyle looked at each other. Kyle pulled out his weapon and Daniel activated his flashlight. They followed Guardian into the facility. The corridor was made of smooth metal and was clearly human construction. There were lights in the ceiling, but they were dim. As they walked deeper, the corridor opened into a larger space. It was a central chamber, with several other corridors branching off. The chamber was lit by overhead lights and was pleasantly warm. But what made both men stop in their tracks was what they saw in the center of the chamber. There were dogs everywhere. German shepherds, all of them watching Daniel and Kyle with intelligent, calculating eyes. Daniel counted quickly. There were 12 dogs total, not including Guardian. All of them wore the same kind of collar with the same military-style tracking devices that Guardian had. These were the other Sentinel dogs. These were the ones who had supposedly been killed 15 years ago. The dogs parted suddenly, and an old man walked slowly into the chamber. He was thin and frail, looking like he had been sick for a long time. His hair was completely white and his face was lined with age and pain. But his eyes were sharp and clear. He looked at Guardian and his face broke into a smile of pure relief and joy. He knelt down slowly and Guardian walked over to him. She dropped her puppy gently and then pressed her head against the old man's chest. The man wrapped his arms around her and Daniel saw tears running down his face. The man looked up at Daniel and Kyle and spoke in a voice that was weak but steady. He said his name was Dr. Raymond Cole, and he had been waiting 15 years for someone to find them. He said Guardian had left 3 weeks ago to look for help because he was dying, and the dogs would need someone to protect them when he was gone. He looked at Daniel and said he prayed Guardian would find someone with a kind heart, and it looked like his prayers had been answered. Dr. Cole led them deeper into the facility and Daniel was amazed at what he saw. The old scientist had built an entire home for the Sentinel dogs inside the mountain. There were sleeping areas with comfortable beds for each dog. There was a medical bay with equipment that Cole had somehow salvaged from Europa Station. There was a large common area where the dogs could gather. There was even a kitchen area where Cole prepared food. The facility was powered by a geothermal generator that tapped into the volcanic activity deep under the mountain. Cole had thought of everything. He had created a place where the dogs could live safely hidden from the world that wanted them dead. As they walked, Cole told them his story. His voice was weak and he had to stop often to catch his breath, but he wanted them to know everything. Cole explained that he had been the chief scientist on the Enhanced Animal Program from the very beginning. He had helped design the neural implants and had worked directly with the first generation of Sentinel dogs. At first, it had been purely scientific. They were trying to create tools that could help humanity explore and survive in dangerous places. But as the program progressed, something unexpected happened. The dogs began to change in ways that went beyond just intelligence. They started showing emotional depth. They formed relationships with each other and with their human handlers. They showed signs of self-awareness. Cole remembered the day he realized what they had done. One of the dogs, a sentinel named Scout, had used the communication symbols to ask a question. The dog had asked why. Why was it different from other dogs? Why did it think in ways other dogs did not? That simple question had changed everything for Cole. He realized they had not just made smart animals. They had created conscious beings. Cole had tried to convince his superiors that the dogs deserved to be treated as more than just military assets. He argued that they had accidentally created a new form of life, and that they had a responsibility to protect it. But the military leaders did not want to hear it. They saw the dogs' growing consciousness as a liability, not a miracle. They worried about control and about what would happen if the public found out. The decision came down from the top. All Sentinel dogs were to be terminated immediately. The program was to be shut down and all research was to be classified. Cole had begged them to reconsider. He offered to take the dogs and retire from the military. He offered to keep them hidden away where they would not be a problem. But General Sutton had been firm. The dogs were military property and they would be disposed of according to regulations. Cole was given 1 week to prepare the dogs for termination. That week had been the worst of Cole's life. He looked at the 12 dogs under his care and he could not do it. He could not kill beings that he knew were conscious and aware, beings that trusted him and looked to him for protection. So he made a choice that would change his life forever. He decided to save them. Cole spent that week carefully planning. He had access to supply ships that came to Europa Station regularly. He managed to smuggle the dogs onto a transport ship 1 or 2 at a time, hidden in cargo containers. He falsified records to make it look like the dogs had been euthanized. He even went so far as to create fake cremation certificates. On the last day before the station was to be shut down, Cole took a small ship and left. The official story was that he had retired and moved to a colony world. But in reality, he had come here to this remote planet with his 12 Sentinel dogs to give them a chance at life. The first few years had been incredibly hard. Cole had used all his savings to buy the equipment and supplies they needed. He had spent months building this facility by hand with the dogs helping him. They had learned to hunt and survive in the harsh environment. Cole had taught the dogs how to use the communication systems more effectively. He had helped them understand what they were and why they were different. Over time, the facility became a real home. The dogs thrived in their hidden valley. They formed a close community. Some of them paired up and had puppies. Those puppies inherited their parents' enhanced intelligence, creating a new generation. Cole had documented everything, hoping that one day he would be able to share his research with the world. He hoped that one day society would be ready to accept conscious animals as equals. But then a year ago, Cole had gotten sick. It started as fatigue and weakness. He thought it was just age catching up with him, but it got worse. Lisa examined him with her medical scanner and her face fell. She looked at Daniel and shook her head slightly. Cole saw the look and gave a sad smile. He said he knew he did not have much time left. The cancer had spread throughout his body, and at his age and in this remote location there was nothing that could be done. He had maybe a few weeks at most. That was why he had sent Guardian to find help. The dogs needed someone to protect them after he was gone. They needed someone who would see them as more than just animals. Guardian had volunteered to go even though she was pregnant. She was the bravest of all the Sentinels. She had traveled over 200 miles through dangerous terrain alone. She had trusted that she would find someone with a good heart. And she had found Daniel. Cole looked at Daniel with eyes full of hope and desperation. He asked if Daniel would protect the dogs. He asked if Daniel would make sure they were not hunted down and killed. Daniel knelt down next to the old man and promised that he would do everything in his power to keep the Sentinels safe. Cole nodded and seemed to relax a little. He said there was something important Daniel needed to know. In this facility was 15 years' worth of research and documentation. Cole had recorded everything about the enhanced animal program. He had copies of the original research. He had video evidence of the dog's consciousness and emotional capacity. He had recordings of the orders to terminate the dogs and his own logs about helping them escape. All of this evidence was stored on secure drives in the medical bay. If something happened to Cole, this evidence needed to get to the right people. It was proof that the military had created conscious beings and then tried to destroy them. It was proof that could change how society viewed animal consciousness forever. Daniel asked Cole why he had never tried to share this information before. Cole explained that he had been afraid. He knew that if General Sutton found out the dogs were still alive, he would send people to finish the job. Cole had chosen to keep the dogs hidden and safe rather than risk exposing them. But now he was dying and he had no choice. The dogs could not stay hidden forever. They needed legal protection. They needed society to recognize them as conscious beings with rights. The only way to do that was to go public with the evidence. Daniel understood the risk. If they made this information public, Sutton would do everything in his power to stop them. But if they did nothing, the dogs would be discovered eventually and they would have no protection. It was a difficult choice, but Daniel knew what had to be done. That evening, Daniel contacted Helen using the secure communicator. He told her everything he had learned. He described the facility and the other Sentinel dogs. He told her about Dr. Cole and the evidence he had collected. Helen listened in silence. When Daniel finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she told him something that made his blood run cold. Sutton's ship had broken orbit and was heading toward the planet. They had ignored all warnings and were preparing to land. Helen had scrambled what defensive forces the settlement had, but they were limited. More importantly, Helen had intercepted a communication from the ship. They knew about Frost Ridge. Somehow Sutton had figured out where the dogs were hiding. He was coming with armed troops and he planned to destroy the facility and everything in it. They had maybe 24 hours before Sutton arrived at the valley. Daniel looked at Cole and the 12 Sentinel dogs gathered around him. They had survived 15 years in hiding, but their time was up. The fight they had been avoiding was coming whether they wanted it or not. The facility became a hub of urgent activity. Daniel and Kyle immediately began planning their defense while Lisa worked with Dr. Cole to copy all his research data onto portable drives. The Sentinel dogs seemed to understand the danger and they stayed close, watching everything with worried eyes. Daniel studied the valley's layout and realized they had some advantages. There was only one way into the valley by ground, and it was a narrow pass that could be defended. The cliffs surrounding them were too steep for vehicles to climb. But Sutton's people would have aircraft and they could land troops directly into the valley. Kyle suggested they could use the weather to their advantage. A storm was moving in and it would make flying dangerous. If they could hold out until the storm hit, it might give them time to evacuate. But evacuate to where? There was nowhere else to hide and they could not outrun military ships. Daniel made a decision that would change everything. He told Helen to send out a message to every news organization and government office in the colonized systems. He wanted them to broadcast everything they had. All of Dr. Cole's research, all the evidence of the enhanced animal program, and all the proof that General Sutton had ordered conscious beings to be killed. Helen was hesitant. She said once they did that there was no going back. Sutton would have no reason to hold back if his secret was already exposed. But Daniel argued that was exactly the point. Right now, Sutton could kill everyone and destroy the evidence and nobody would ever know. But if the information was already public, then killing them would not help him. It would only make things worse. The whole galaxy would be watching. Sutton would have to back down or face consequences. Helen saw the logic in it, but she warned him it was a huge gamble. Daniel looked at Guardian and her 5 puppies. He looked at the other Sentinel dogs who had done nothing wrong except exist. He told Helen to do it. Helen worked fast. She uploaded all the data to secure networks and sent it to dozens of contacts simultaneously. Within an hour, the story began spreading across the communication networks. News agencies picked it up immediately. The headlines were shocking. Secret military program created conscious animals, then ordered them killed. Evidence shows cover-up lasting 15 years. Sentinel dogs alive and hiding from military death squads. The response was instantaneous and massive. People across the colonized worlds were outraged. How could the military create conscious beings and then murder them? Social media exploded with demands for investigation. Government officials began calling for hearings. Animal rights groups mobilized protests. Within 3 hours, the story had reached billions of people, and at the center of it all was one question. Where were the sentinel dogs now, and how could they be protected? Daniel received a message from Helen. She sounded amazed and hopeful. The public reaction had been far stronger than anyone expected. 3 colonial governors had already issued statements supporting protection for the sentinel dogs. Several military commanders had publicly refused to follow any orders that would harm the dogs. Most importantly, the Colonial Council had issued an emergency protection order. Any action against the sentinel dogs was temporarily illegal, until a full investigation could be conducted. It was not permanent protection, but it was something. Helen said Sutton's ship had slowed down. They were still approaching, but they were not rushing anymore. The general was probably trying to figure out his next move now that the entire galaxy was watching. But Helen warned that desperate men do desperate things. They still needed to be ready for anything. Dr. Cole watched all of this happen from his bed in the medical bay. His condition had worsened with the stress and excitement. Lisa had him on medication to manage his pain, but they all knew he did not have much time left. Cole asked Daniel to bring him the communication data pad. With shaking hands, the old scientist selected symbols and pictures. He was not as fast as the dogs, but he managed to create a simple message. He asked Daniel to record him. Daniel set up a video camera and Cole spoke directly to it. His voice was weak, but his words were clear. He introduced himself and explained what he had done 15 years ago. He talked about the sentinel dogs and how they had developed consciousness. He spoke about the joy of watching them learn and grow. He talked about their emotions, their relationships, their capacity for love and grief and hope. He said that in all his years as a scientist, this had been his greatest achievement, not because he had made smart animals, but because he had witnessed the emergence of a new kind of consciousness. He said the dogs deserved to live free and safe. He said they deserved recognition as beings with rights, and he said he hoped humanity would choose compassion over fear. When Cole finished speaking, he looked exhausted but peaceful. Guardian had been lying next to his bed the whole time. She got up and put her head on his lap. Cole petted her gently and smiled. He told Daniel to make sure the video got out to the public. It needed to be his testimony, his final plea for the beings he had spent his life protecting. Daniel promised he would. He sent the video to Helen immediately, and she broadcast it across all networks. The response was overwhelming. Millions of people watched the dying scientist beg for mercy for his sentinel dogs. Many were moved to tears. The tide of public opinion shifted even more strongly in favor of the dogs. Protests grew larger. Government pressure increased, and General Patrick Sutton found himself at the center of a storm he could not control. Night fell on the hidden valley, and the temperature dropped sharply. The promised storm was moving in, and snow began to fall heavily. Daniel and Kyle kept watch at the entrance to the facility. They had set up sensors that would alert them if anyone approached. The sentinel dogs had gathered in the common area. They seemed to sense that something important was happening. Guardian was with her puppies, but she kept looking at the other dogs like she was communicating with them somehow. Daniel wondered if the neural implants allowed them to share thoughts or feelings. It would not surprise him at this point. These dogs had proven to be far more capable than anyone imagined. Around midnight, the sensors went off. Something was approaching the valley. Daniel and Kyle grabbed their weapons and moved to defensive positions. They watched the monitors and saw lights in the sky. Aircraft were coming. Multiple ships were descending through the storm toward the valley. This was it. Sutton had decided to act despite everything. But then something unexpected happened. The ships landed, but they did not deploy troops to attack. Instead, a single figure emerged from the lead ship and walked toward the facility entrance. The person was alone and unarmed. Daniel watched on the monitors as the figure reached the door and stopped. There was a pause, and then Daniel's communicator crackled to life. A voice identified itself as Commander Paul Griffin from the Colonial Security Force. He said he was there to provide protection for the sentinel dogs under orders from the Colonial Council. His ships and troops were there to make sure nobody harmed the facility or its inhabitants. He requested permission to speak with whoever was in charge. Daniel looked at Kyle in amazement. They had been preparing for an attack, but instead they were getting protection. He opened the door and invited Commander Griffin inside. Griffin was a tall man in his 50s with gray hair and a military bearing. He explained that he had been ordered to secure the facility as soon as the protection order was issued. He had brought 3 ships and 50 troops. They would establish a perimeter around the valley and prevent anyone from entering without authorization. He said General Sutton's ship had tried to enter the system, but had been turned back by colonial defense forces. Sutton was currently under house arrest pending investigation for war crimes. The whole situation had moved faster than anyone expected because the public pressure had been so intense. Griffin asked to see the sentinel dogs. Daniel led him to the common area. Griffin stopped when he saw them. 12 German shepherds all watching him with intelligent, aware eyes. Griffin had seen the videos and read the reports, but seeing them in person was different. He stared for a long moment and then slowly knelt down. He spoke to the dogs like they were people because in his mind they clearly were. He told them they were safe now. He told them the galaxy was on their side. Guardian walked over to him and touched her nose to his hand. Griffin smiled and Daniel saw tears in the commander's eyes. Dr. Raymond Cole passed away peacefully 3 days later, surrounded by all the sentinel dogs he had saved. They had gathered around his bed in the medical bay and stayed with him until the end. Guardian lay with her head on his chest and the other dogs formed a circle around them. When Cole took his last breath, there was a moment of profound silence. Then one of the dogs began to howl. It was a long, mournful sound filled with genuine grief. One by one, the other dogs joined in until the entire facility echoed with their chorus of sorrow. Daniel stood watching with tears streaming down his face. This was not the howling of animals. This was mourning. This was loss. This was proof of everything Cole had tried to tell the world. These dogs understood death and they felt grief just as deeply as any human would. Lisa recorded the moment on video and sent it out to the networks. The image of 12 dogs mourning their human protector became one of the most viewed pieces of media in history. It changed minds across the galaxy. Even people who had been skeptical about animal consciousness could not deny what they were seeing. Cole's funeral was held in the valley 5 days later. By that time, the area had transformed completely. Commander Griffin's troops had established a secure perimeter. News crews from a dozen different organizations had arrived with permission to document what was happening. Scientists and animal behavior experts had flown in to study the sentinel dogs. Government officials came to assess the situation. The Hidden Valley had become the most famous place in the colonized worlds. Cole was buried on a hillside overlooking the valley with full honors. Representatives from the Colonial Council attended. They gave speeches about sacrifice and conscience and doing what was right even when it was hard. But the most moving part of the funeral came when Guardian approached Cole's grave. She carried in her mouth a small bundle. It was one of Cole's old research journals that he used to write in every day. She placed it carefully on the grave and then sat back. She looked at the gathered crowd and touched her nose to the communication data pad that someone had brought. The symbols she selected were simple but powerful. Thank you. Good man. Remember always. The weeks that followed were chaotic but hopeful. The Colonial Council established a special commission to study the sentinel dogs and determine their legal status. Scientists examined the dogs extensively but with care and respect for their autonomy. The dogs allowed the examinations because they understood it was necessary to prove their consciousness. The results were conclusive. The sentinel dogs showed brain activity patterns that were remarkably similar to human consciousness. They demonstrated problem-solving abilities equivalent to human children. They showed emotional responses that matched human emotions in complexity. They communicated using symbols with grammar and syntax. They formed social bonds and showed empathy. They understood abstract concepts like time and death and fairness. By every measure that science could apply, these dogs were conscious beings. The legal battle was harder. There were no laws about artificial consciousness or enhanced animals. The courts had to create entirely new legal frameworks. Some people argued the dogs were property because they had been created by humans. Others argued they were a new species deserving of rights. The debate raged for months, but public opinion was overwhelmingly on the dogs' side. Protests continued around the colonized worlds. Millions of people signed petitions demanding protection for the sentinels. Children wrote letters to government officials begging them to keep the dogs safe. Artists created works celebrating the dogs. Musicians wrote songs about them. The sentinel dogs had captured the imagination and hearts of billions of people. Finally, after 6 months of deliberation, the Colonial Supreme Court issued its ruling. The sentinel dogs were declared conscious beings with legal rights. They were not property and could not be owned. They had the right to life, liberty, and self-determination. They could not be harmed or forced to work against their will. They would be treated as wards of the state until a more permanent solution could be found. The ruling was historic and had implications far beyond just the sentinel dogs. It opened the door for other forms of artificial or enhanced consciousness to be recognized. It forced society to think about what consciousness meant and where the line was between person and animal. Philosophers and ethicists debated the questions for years, but for the sentinel dogs themselves, the ruling meant safety. They could come out of hiding. They could live without fear. Guardian and her 5 puppies were given special recognition for their role in bringing the truth to light. The Colonial Council offered to build them a proper sanctuary anywhere they wanted. Guardian used the communication system to tell them what she wanted. She wanted to stay in the valley where Cole had built their home. She wanted the other sentinels to be able to choose for themselves where they lived. Some might want to stay hidden. Others might want to integrate into human society. The choice should be theirs. The Colonial Council agreed and funded the expansion of the valley facility into a proper sanctuary. It would serve as a home base for any sentinel dogs who wanted to stay there. But they were free to leave and live elsewhere if they chose. Over time, some of the dogs did choose to leave. They went to live with humans who understood and respected them. They worked as therapy animals, helping people with trauma because their enhanced empathy made them incredibly good at it. They worked as rescue animals, using their intelligence to save lives. They worked alongside scientists helping with research. But they always worked as partners, not as tools. They were paid for their work and had the right to refuse any job. It was a strange new world where dogs could have careers and bank accounts, but humanity adapted. The sentinel dogs became a normal part of society. Children grew up knowing that some dogs were as smart as people, and that was okay. Guardian chose to stay in the valley. She raised her 5 puppies there, teaching them about their heritage and about the man who had saved their kind. The puppies grew up strong and smart and eventually had puppies of their own. The sentinel dog population began to grow slowly. Each new generation inherited the enhanced neural structures and the capacity for high intelligence. Scientists monitored them carefully to make sure they were healthy, but otherwise left them alone. Guardian became something of a legend. She was the dog who had walked through a frozen forest to save her species. She was the mother of the new generation. She was the bridge between the hidden past and the open future. People came from across the colonized worlds just to meet her. She was always gracious with visitors, allowing them to see her and her family. She used the communication system to answer questions and tell stories about Dr. Cole and the early days in hiding. Daniel remained close to Guardian for the rest of her life. He visited the valley every month and always brought treats for the puppies. Guardian would greet him with obvious joy, and they would walk together through the valley like old friends. Daniel had become famous too as the officer who found Guardian and helped expose the truth. He could have leveraged that fame into a cushy job or political career, but he stayed as a simple patrol officer. He said his job was to protect people, and he had learned that people came in many forms. He continued to patrol the wild areas around New Colorado settlement. And sometimes when he was out in the forest, he would think about that snowy night when he found a pregnant dog under a fallen tree. That one moment of compassion had changed everything. It had saved a species. It had changed laws. It had made humanity face uncomfortable questions about consciousness and responsibility. All because he had stopped to help an animal in need. Helen Brooks was promoted to regional security chief for her role in protecting the sentinel dogs. She used her new position to create protocols for dealing with artificial and enhanced consciousness. Other facilities that had been working on similar programs came forward once the sentinel dogs were protected. There were enhanced dolphins that could communicate complex ideas. There were enhanced primates that showed remarkable problem-solving abilities. There was even an AI that claimed to be self-aware. Each case had to be evaluated carefully, but the precedent set by the sentinel dogs made it easier. Society was learning to recognize consciousness in new forms. Lisa Montgomery became the chief veterinarian at the Sentinel Sanctuary. She dedicated her life to caring for the dogs and helping them with medical needs. She also trained other vets in how to work with conscious animals. It required a different approach. You could not just do procedures without explaining them. You had to get consent. You had to respect their choices. It was challenging, but Lisa loved the work. She felt honored to be trusted by beings as remarkable as the sentinel dogs. 10 years passed and the world had changed in ways nobody could have predicted. The Sentinel dogs were no longer a curiosity or a controversy. They were simply part of life. Children grew up playing with Sentinel puppies and learned early that some dogs could think and talk using computers. Schools taught about consciousness in all its forms. The old idea that only humans could be truly conscious was gone. Society had expanded its circle of moral consideration. The Sentinel Sanctuary in the valley had grown into a thriving community. There were now over 50 Sentinel dogs living there, with more being born each year. They had built their own structures with human help. They had gardens where they grew food. They had workshops where they created art and tools. They had schools where the older dogs taught the younger ones. It was a true civilization built by dogs for dogs, but they remained connected to human society. The valley had become a place where humans and Sentinels could meet as equals and learn from each other. Guardian was now an old dog. Her muzzle had turned gray and she moved more slowly than she used to. But her eyes were still bright and aware. Her 5 puppies were now adults with families of their own. She had grandpuppies and great-grandpuppies running around the valley. On quiet evenings, she would sit on the hillside near Dr. Cole's grave and watch the sun set over the mountains. Daniel would often join her on these evenings. He was older too, with gray in his hair and lines on his face. They would sit in comfortable silence, 2 old friends who had been through extraordinary things together. Sometimes Daniel would use the communication pad to ask Guardian questions. He asked her what she remembered about the old days when she lived in hiding. He asked her if she was happy now. He asked her what she wanted for her children and grandchildren. Guardian's answers were always thoughtful and showed the depth of her consciousness. She told him through the symbols and pictures that she remembered everything. She remembered Europa Station and the fear when the termination order came. She remembered Dr. Cole's face when he told them he would save them. She remembered the journey to this valley and the hard years of building a home. She remembered being pregnant and alone in the frozen forest. She remembered the moment she saw Daniel's vehicle lights and made the decision to trust him. She said that decision had saved her species. She said she was grateful every day for his kindness. When Daniel asked if she was happy, Guardian took a long time to answer. She selected symbols carefully. She said happiness was complicated. She was happy to be safe and to see her children thriving. She was happy that her kind would continue. But she was sad for the dogs who died at Europa Station. She was sad for the years spent in hiding. She was sad that it took so long for humans to see them as conscious beings. She said happiness and sadness could exist together, and that was part of being truly conscious. When Daniel asked what she wanted for future generations, Guardian's answer was simple and profound. She wanted choice. She wanted every Sentinel dog to be able to choose their own path in life. She wanted them to have the freedom to stay in the valley or leave. She wanted them to work with humans or live independently. She wanted them to have relationships and families. She wanted them to be seen as individuals, not as a category. She wanted them to be judged by their character, not by their species. Daniel told her that was what all conscious beings wanted. That was the heart of freedom and dignity. Guardian touched the screen one more time and selected a symbol that meant yes. She understood. That was what Dr. Cole had fought for. That was what Daniel had helped achieve. That was the legacy they would leave. The Colonial Council had expanded its recognition of consciousness rights over the years. Inspired by the Sentinel dogs, they had created laws protecting enhanced animals and artificial intelligences. There was now a whole branch of government dedicated to consciousness affairs. It handled cases involving beings that did not fit traditional categories. The laws were not perfect and there were still debates and challenges. But the foundation had been laid. Society had accepted that consciousness could emerge in unexpected forms, and that all conscious beings deserved basic rights. The Sentinel dogs had been the catalyst for this change. Their story had touched billions of people and changed how humanity thought about its relationship with other minds. Schools taught about Guardian and Dr. Cole as examples of courage and compassion. The day the Colonial Supreme Court recognized the dogs' rights was now an official holiday called Consciousness Day. It was a day to reflect on what it meant to be aware and alive. General Patrick Sutton had been convicted of war crimes and conspiracy. He spent 5 years in prison before being released. He was a broken man who had lost everything because he chose fear over compassion. In a strange twist, Sutton eventually sought out the Sentinel Sanctuary and asked to speak with Guardian. She agreed to meet him, which surprised many people. The meeting was private, but those who saw Sutton leave said he was crying. He never spoke publicly about what was said, but he spent the rest of his life doing volunteer work for animal consciousness rights. Some people said Guardian had forgiven him. Others said she had simply shown him what he had tried to destroy. Whatever happened in that meeting, it changed Sutton. He became an advocate for the very beings he had once tried to kill. It was proof that even hardened hearts could change when confronted with genuine consciousness and grace. The legacy of the Enhanced Animal Program was complicated. On one hand, it had created consciousness through artificial means which raised ethical questions. On the other hand, it had given rise to an entirely new form of life that enriched the galaxy. Scientists continued to debate whether humanity had the right to create conscious beings. The consensus that emerged was that if consciousness was created intentionally or accidentally, the creators had an absolute responsibility to protect and nurture it. The tragedy of the Enhanced Animal Program was not that it created the Sentinel dogs. The tragedy was that humanity's first instinct had been to destroy them out of fear. That mistake would never be forgotten. The Sentinel dogs themselves had mixed feelings about their origin. They had not asked to be created. They had not asked to be different from other dogs. But they existed, and they had lives and relationships and hopes. They made the best of what they were given and built something beautiful from it. Daniel retired from patrol duty at the age of 60. On his last day of work, he drove out to the valley one final time in an official capacity. The Sentinel dogs threw him a retirement party. They had learned human customs over the years and enjoyed celebrations. There was food and music and games. The puppies played while the adults talked. It was a joyful occasion, but also bittersweet. Daniel had been part of their lives for so long. He had been there from the beginning. Guardian gave him a gift. It was a collar that Dr. Cole had made for her when she first came to the valley. The collar was simple leather with her name carved into it. Guardian no longer needed collars. The Sentinels had moved beyond such things, but she wanted Daniel to have it as a symbol of trust and friendship. Daniel accepted the gift with tears in his eyes. He put it in a special place in his home where he could see it every day. On a cold winter evening 15 years after he first found Guardian in the forest, Daniel received a call. It was Lisa from the sanctuary. She told him that Guardian was dying. She was very old now and her body was finally giving out. She was not in pain, but she did not have much time left. Daniel drove through the night to reach the valley. When he arrived, Guardian was lying in her favorite spot on the hillside near Cole's grave. Her family was gathered around her. Her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They formed a circle of warmth and love around their matriarch. Daniel knelt down next to Guardian and took her paw gently in his hand. She opened her eyes and looked at him. Even now at the end, those eyes were full of intelligence and awareness. She looked at him with what he could only describe as gratitude and affection. Daniel told her she had been brave. He told her she had saved her people. He told her the galaxy was better because she had lived. Guardian's tail moved slightly. Then she closed her eyes and took her last breath, surrounded by love. The howling that followed echoed across the valley and out into the mountains beyond. It was picked up by the Sentinel dogs in the facility and by those who lived in the settlement nearby. It spread through the communication networks as word traveled. Sentinel dogs across the colonized worlds joined the chorus. Even humans who heard it felt compelled to stop and listen. It was a sound of mourning, but also of celebration. Guardian had lived a full life. She had fought for her kind and won. She had seen her children and grandchildren thrive. She had bridged two worlds and helped create a better future. Her death was sad, but her life had been meaningful. Daniel stood on the hillside and listened to the howling. He thought about that snowy night so long ago when he made the choice to stop and help a pregnant dog. That one decision had changed everything. It had saved a species. It had changed laws and society. It had proven that consciousness deserved respect no matter what form it took, and it had given Daniel the greatest friendship of his life. Guardian was buried next to Dr.